Hi, I'm Diana Gruver, and you're listening to the Caretakers Journey podcast.
Welcome to our show today. I'm your host, Carole Leathem, and my guest knows depression personally. And I am so excited to talk to her about this. She draws from her own experience. She offers practical wisdom for those who struggle, and especially for those of us who care for those who struggle. She has written a fascinating book that takes us back through history and looks at some of our Christian heroes who possibly struggled with depression and doubt. I really appreciate her research and the lessons that we can glean from each of these people's lives. Her book is called Companions in the Darkness. It is one that shares valuable lessons about the experience of depression and how we can find hope from these leaders for the journey that we are walking today. Diana Gruver has a master's degree in spiritual formation from Gordon Cornwell Theological Seminary, and I said that wrong. Remember, I don't edit, guys, so it's going to go back and I'm going to say Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Those of you who graduated from that or know about it are going, you said it wrong. But she writes about spiritual formation and discipleship, and she lives in Pennsylvania with her husband and her children. She is passionate about encouraging, equipping, and nurturing disciples of Jesus, giving us, and I put myself in that, a vision of how he speaks to every area of our life. Diana, I am so excited for our conversation, and I just want to welcome you to the show today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Carole. It's just a joy to be with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, Diana, I would like to just kind of dive in real quick and share your personal story with us. Talk to us about how this topic became a part of your life.
So, I've personally struggled with depression. I think you alluded to that a few minutes ago. For me, it really hit when I was in college. I didn't have the words for it at first. I didn't really know what it was.
Mm,
But my senior year, I just increasingly was feeling sad and low and crying all the time. And I didn't have the energy to get up and do class. I couldn't concentrate as much. I just had this fog that was enveloping me. Um, and with the encouragement of some friends, I went to the counseling center there at our college, and that's where I was first given the name for it, that I was struggling with depression. And so it was this process of sitting in counseling sessions and taking medication and having
mhm.
to overcome some of my initial misgivings about it and wrestling through that. I think one of the things that also definitely went along with that for me, and part of it was my personality, part of it was the environment I was in, and part of it I think I've learned is just part of the experience of depression as a Christian
Mm,
was the spiritual aspect to it,
mhm,
where I felt like I was in deep need and in deep pain,
mm,
and I didn't feel God's presence with me in
mm,
that, or I felt as if I was somehow failing as a Christian because I felt this way.
mm.
And so it was a long process of having to unlearn some of those things, to have friends who sat with me in it. And, ever since then, depression has been something that I just have to be aware of. It's not been nearly that deep in most of the seasons since then, but I have to pay attention.
Mm.
Okay, life is just getting a little more overwhelming than it should right now. I'm feeling a lot more irritable towards my children than I should be right now. I'm crying a lot more. I'm struggling to get out of bed, and maybe I need to ask for help. Maybe I need to increase the dosage of my meds or seek out a new therapist or whatever those things are, to make sure that I stay as healthy as possible. Um, yeah.
Oh, Diana, thank you so much for being so transparent and authentic about this. I know that when my husband began to struggle 10 years ago, I wish I had understood what depression was.
Yeah.
I really, really did. And in a minute, we're going to go even more deeper into this idea because I had no idea that when he started to kind of be blue or not want to get out of bed or not want to go to work, I didn't really know what we were dealing with until it was full blown
Yeah.
suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
And I think had I known, I look back now and I go, oh my gosh, had I known now all of the things that I know, I could have helped in so many more sort of helpful ways than
Yeah.
what I did. So, how did that part of your story lead you to write this fascinating book, Companions in the Darkness?
So I think whenever you've struggled with something like depression, you recognize it when you see the signs or hear certain words that people say. They don't have to come full out and say, "Oh, yes, I'm depressed." But you hear the way they're describing what life feels like for them. And you think, "Oh, I know what that sounds like. I've been there. I know what those feelings mean."
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I was in seminary, years after that first deeper episode of depression, and I was studying church history as a part of my program at Gordon Conwell. And in some of my classes, I just kept hearing these little snippets from some of these
Mm,
different famous believers that we were studying, that we celebrate, whose names we recognize. And I realized I think they were depressed.
mm,
And it really, it really piqued my curiosity because I had never heard that before.
mm,
I had never heard someone say, "Oh, yeah, Martin Luther was probably depressed." Charles Spurgeon was depressed.
mm.
And so it set me out on a journey of sorts to try to learn from them, to understand their stories. And I think that there's something really powerful when we hear the stories of people that we celebrate and we respect and we realize they struggle like we do. And that did not stop God's ability to use them.
Mm.
It did not mean that they were not faithful. And so if that was true for them, it's true for me too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this beautiful message because I know that there are so many people. I have sat with my husband who was a pastor for 35 years and then now he's not.
Mhm.
And you wake up one day and you go, "Oh my gosh, because of this." And the church really has not helped that.
Yeah.
I have to be honest. The church does not really help in the understanding. They tend to shun a little
Yeah.
bit, and we have felt that
Mhm.
a lot. Now, where we're at right now, he is very involved in the music program. And so he's doing something he loves and as a pastor never got to do.
Mhm.
And so now I watch him as he's ministering in different ways, but God is still using him. And
Yeah.
I think that's so important because that is something that I thought about when I was reading through the lives of these people in your book. So let's just define as you talk about the words they were saying or the things that made you go, define for us depression and talk about a few of those things that maybe triggered in you the thought that this person should or probably did struggle.
Yeah. So depression is more than just being sad or more than being down. We all feel sadness. We all have seasons or days or moments where we just feel blue. We don't quite have the zip in our to-do da, as you would say.
That's cute. I
And
like
that's
that.
normal. That's a part of the human experience.
Yeah.
But depression is more than that. So there's a persistent sense of sadness. There's a loss of interest in things that maybe you once enjoyed
Mm,
or brought you pleasure. And there's physiological symptoms to it as well. I think that's something that many people don't realize until they learn more about depression. There's things like changes to appetite or changes to your sleep. Maybe you sleep less or you sleep more. You don't have as much energy. You can't concentrate. You might have stomach problems or
mhm,
things like that that pop up, aches and pains, and these sorts of things that can be a part of it. And then, of course, you also have the thoughts of suicide or self harm,
mhm,
where there's this hopelessness that life is too painful to keep
mhm,
going like this.
mhm,
Um, and so that cluster of symptoms is more than just being sad.
mm,
It's an all body thing, an all brain thing, and it gets to the point where it interferes with our ability to do life, to
mhm,
work, to have normal, healthy relationships. And that's where obviously it can become really debilitating and
mm.
really painful
Yeah,
because you just can't exist in the way that you
yeah.
want to or maybe once have. And so I think, I mean, with each of these people, whenever you listen to their stories, whenever you hear Charles Spurgeon talk about how what was his line? Nights of watching and days of weeping have been mine.
Mm,
And how he used to read the Bible and it was comforting to him. And now it was just like a bunch of knives piercing his
mm,
heart. You have Martin Luther King Jr., who struggled to get out of bed. He was
mm,
just too exhausted, too discouraged, and he couldn't get up.
mm.
And if you hear these things, you start to put the pieces together and realize they may not have used the word depression in their
Yeah.
time and place, but it's something that is akin enough to what we
Mhm,
experience today and call depression that we can
mhm.
really learn from their experiences.
Yeah, and even Bible characters, there's been
Yeah.
so many Bible characters. I know that in my journey leading up to my husband's depression, I talk about this in my book, a story of how this man had won this huge battle, and killed all the prophets of Baal, and then he's lying on the floor of the cave, and and God just used that story in such a supernatural way
Yeah.
to show me that even in the Bible times, people struggled, because at that point I didn't know what was wrong with my husband, but I knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
And God just basically walked me through this whole thing. And then when it finally hit, we're at a point in time where our son is and his wife are waiting for a new baby to come. And it's should be one of the most joyous, exciting times. But my husband was sitting in the chair with a sweatshirt over his head and couldn't get off the couch
Yeah.
and wouldn't talk to anybody, wouldn't interact with the 2-year-old that we adored,
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
sleep all the time and just was in so much pain. And I look back now, and some of the things you're sharing about, had I been more aware. And I think one of the things that I really, really want to be most authentic and transparent about is that there are things that we can see, and there are things that are like road signs that we need to,
Mhm.
to step up and say, okay, wait a minute, this is not true. Even now, I watch when my husband gets out of bed in the morning, how does he respond?
Mhm.
And I can pretty much tell now, okay, we need to go for a walk. Let's get outside, find
Mhm.
a way to get him engaged, and it's hard. It is so, so hard.
Yeah.
So when I picked up your book, this was so fascinating for me. And I saw the names: Martin Luther, Charles Spurgeon, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King. I was so intrigued because before we talk about one of them specifically that just blew my mind, how did you I mean, you've talked a little bit about, reading, going through their readings and listening to how they write. But how do we determine, and of course we can't pre-diagnose them and say for sure that's what it was, but go a little deeper into how we can determine that these people really struggled with depression and doubt. Like you talked a little bit about Charles Spurgeon,
Mhm.
but some of the others.
Yeah, I tried really hard to make sure that I was writing about people that there was enough firsthand evidence from their words and those close to them that I wouldn't have to spend a lot of time in the book just building a case to say, "Let me build this historical
Yeah.
case that Charles Spurgeon was depressed." Um, and so there were some people that maybe we could include, but I just set to the side because there wasn't enough evidence.
Hmm.
Um, some of them were surprising. Dr. King, for example, I
Yeah.
had never heard that. And I stumbled upon a documentary that included a lot of firsthand accounts of some of his
Mhm.
closest friends and associates. And they were sharing about what was going on behind the scenes
Yeah.
during the last several years of his life. And yeah, those details of, he was very discouraged. He had had some history of some suicide attempts when he was a young man.
Did not know
He
that.
like far before the civil rights movement, um those moments where he just struggled to get out of
Mm.
bed and was very discouraged and negative about what was going on. And so from he didn't talk about it. I think for him, he probably didn't have the freedom to talk about it or share
Yeah.
about it in the way that I wish he could have. um but their stories, I think, attest to him struggling that way.
Mm.
And isn't that the case for a lot of us? We feel like,
Oh,
and I know that you have a lot of caretakers that listen
yeah.
to this podcast. And I think there's, for many of us, we're told we believe this narrative that we have to be the strong one,
Mm,
and that means we have to push down the areas where we struggle or we need to hide them because they will make us weak or will weaken us.
mm,
And I think that is a lie.
yes.
And the more that we hide those things and push them down, the more they build, the more that pressure builds. Whereas if we would get the help that we need or
Yeah.
find that friend that we can talk to, we can have that strength and comfort that will help us endure for the long haul.
Mm, I love that so much. So why do you I've got an opinion, but I wanna hear yours first. So why do you think it's important that we need to you kind of alluded to it, but I wanna go deeper. Why do you think it's important that we tell the stories of these people who struggled?
Yes. So, anyone that has struggled with mental health knows that there is a stigma that comes with this. This is true just at large, but definitely within the church as well.
Mm,
And I think one of the things that feeds that stigma is silence.
yes.
And there is nothing that I know that is as good at unraveling stigma as the telling of stories. Now, that is true of like your story and my story, Carol.
Yeah.
That's, just here chatting a little bit. Clearly, this is a part of the heart of why you started this podcast, right? Being able
Mhm.
to share stories does so much to unravel that stigma. But especially then with people that we celebrate as heroes and we're still talking about them, we still respect them, we're still telling these stories years, decades, centuries after their death. Whenever we find out that they struggle too, and we can see the whole testimony of their life, of how God was at work even in the struggles, and sometimes especially because of the struggles, where
Mhm.
it actually enabled them to be better ministers and people helpers and more compassionate.
Mm,
That is a very, very powerful encourager for us, um, that God can use us. God is still in the work of this story. I think one of the other advantages to these people from history that we don't get for people today is we get to see the whole story.
yes.
And we don't always get that. There's some people like I think of David Brainerd and William Cooper. We haven't mentioned them, but they didn't get to have that aha moment in their life where they saw maybe how God was using their story or using their attempts to continue to be faithful, even though they
Mhm.
struggled so deeply. But because we have the advantage of looking back,
Mhm.
we can see some of those things that they couldn't. And I found that to be really important and encouraging because sometimes we get those aha moments and we get those glimmers of where God has been and is at work, but a lot of the time we don't.
That's true.
And so when we can hear from these brothers and sisters from the past and see, oh, God did it there, it gives me faith and hope that He's doing it in my life too, even if I can't see it.
Oh, I love that so much. And, this our podcast is listened in 22 countries.
Wow.
And my fastest growing market is Russia
Hmm,
and the UK.
hmm,
And I've done a little bit of research, and I know that the UK has just an enormous amount of dementia patient they're giving their dementia patients are growing by
hmm.
leaps and pounds, leaps and just they're just growing. And so I know that there's a lot of caregivers out there that they're just like I remember when I became a caregiver for someone who struggled. What do you do? Where do you go? Who do you talk to? Who's safe? And I love, love, love what you said, because when we can see the whole story, it helps us realize. And I know for me, the wake up moment or the aha moment for me was when God said, no, you're going to use this because you're already a speaker and an encourager. And I had a thriving speaking ministry prior to my husband struggling. And then it just dried up because somehow his mental health diagnosis made me not qualified now to continue teaching the Bible and whatever. So everything started drying up for us. And it was like 3 or 4 years into our journey that God said, okay, now you're going to start telling this story.
Yeah.
And you're going to tell people how I show up and how he's still using your husband and your husband is still struggling. And you're going to start those hard conversations
Yeah.
that say, Whether you're a caretaker or whether you're the one that's being cared for, you are still important and God has something for you to do. And I know that there are caretakers that are listening to this podcast right now who are thinking, my life is over. It's just, they're caught up in that stigma of quietness.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that you and I can have this conversation because somebody's going to have that aha moment from listening to our conversation. And that to me makes all of the pain of the last 10 years. Okay, I can be thankful for it. Doesn't mean I like it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I like it, but it means I can be thankful. So each one of these 7 people really surprised me. And your book, I'm telling you, I say this every week when I interview somebody. I don't pick books that I don't read or buy. So I'm not getting books that are sent to me. I do get books that are sent to me from a publisher. And if I want to use their book, I actually go buy their book because I want to own their book. I want to say I have purchased their book. So I purchased your book and I actually tracked you down on social media.
Oh,
I did. That's how I found you. Because I'm always searching for positive voices on social media. And I found your book and I was intrigued and I ordered your book. And when I got your book, I was like, that's when I sent you the message through Instagram. I was like, I don't know if she checks it, but I'm sending her a message because I want to talk to this lady. I want to know this lady. And so I say this every week, you need to buy this book, but this book is fascinating. And if you've ever questioned whether God can use you in the midst of your pain, oh my gosh, or your loved one, oh my gosh. So each one of the 7 people you write about is fascinating, but I was totally shocked by some of the names that were on there, like Martin Luther King. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had heard some about Charles Spurgeon, but I'd never heard about Martin Luther. And I didn't even know who the other people were. And so I actually went and did some deep diving into their lives to find
I
out
love
who
that.
they were
Yeah.
because I want to understand. But the name that surprised me the most was Mother Teresa. I just kind of took a step back and a deep breath when I read her chapter. And her chapter is fascinating because why? Mother Teresa's the subtitle for her chapter in your book is Follow Jesus, Not Your Feelings. So good. But this woman is so well known. The world has always projected her as a saint because in the Catholic world she is, and she's best known for her charitable work and her work with the poor in Calcutta. She won a Nobel Peace Prize. And so when I found out that she struggled, I went, okay, this is really interesting. So, talk to us about why you chose to write a chapter on her and the struggles that we never hear about Mother Teresa.
Yeah. So, she is the only one in the book, I think, that it's debatable whether it was depression.
Mm-hmm.
But the doubt, there is no question. So just a little bit of kind of setting the stage for her story. She had this really clear call from God to go start this mission and serving the poor in Calcutta, this work that she's known for, that she dedicated her life to. And it was very, very shortly after she got started in earnest, in obedience to that call, that it was like all the lights went out and she could no longer feel God's presence. um Prayer felt dry and painful and like she was just speaking into a void. And if you read what's the book, Come Be My Light, I believe, is the collection of her letters to her spiritual advisors. You can read these letters that she wrote, and she had wanted to be destroyed but thankfully were preserved for us. And she's saying it's dark. I feel abandoned, I feel forsaken. um the one line that's always kind of haunted me is she says, the place of God in my soul is blank.
Oh,
And that is what she felt like for the last 4 decades of her ministry, while she was serving and sacrificing and loving and smiling um, towards the poor and vulnerable in the streets of India and around the world. And I think that in my experience and that of everyone that I have talked to, that is part of the experience of depression as a
mm-hmm.
Christian. where the spiritual life feels different, spiritual disciplines feel different, God feels very distant and absent. And so I felt like her pain was a really important story to share
Mm,
because I know what that feels like.
mm.
And I think that you mentioned the "Follow Jesus and Not Your Feelings" subtitle. That was one of my big takeaways from her.
Yeah.
Feelings are wonderful. They are God-given. They can be nice warning lights on the
Yeah.
dashboard of our life,
Yeah.
and God gave them to us. I'm not gonna discount them. But depression is a liar,
Mm,
and the feelings that we experience in depression tell us lies about reality,
mm.
about our own value, about whether life is worth living, and about whether God is present with us and cares about our pain.
Oh,
And
so
so
good.
when we recognize that, then we have to find something that can anchor us and guide us through those dark seasons that is somehow bigger and more overarching, bigger and higher than our
Mhm.
feelings. And so I might feel like God has left me, but that is not true.
Mm. So good.
And so when I look at her life, she didn't feel like God was listening to her. She didn't feel like God was present to her. She sometimes wondered, does God even exist? Like, is this all just a lie? But she had these really clear marching orders. And so it was dark and she was in pain, but she kept going. Um, and I'm no Mother Teresa, but I can take that for my life. I think
Oh,
we all have things where we say, okay, I need to have faith that God is still here. I need to believe that He still has a purpose for my life. And that means I'm going to get up out of bed this morning. That means I'm going to take this medication that I know will help me. I need to get out of the house and go for a walk. It doesn't have to be this Herculean,
yeah.
task that's going to win you a Nobel Peace Prize, but it's just this very simple step that says, I don't feel this. I struggle to believe it, but I'm going to take the next little incremental step as if it is true in faith. And that's what she did. And
Mm.
that's what we can do.
Yes. And that was so helpful for me. Your book came, I purchased your book and it arrived, and I started reading through it, planning out our conversation like I always do every week with whoever I'm going to talk to. And it came at a time when my caretaking was off the charts. My mom is on hospice across the country. I'm kind of ping-ponging back and forth, caring for her. My husband's developed some health issues. So he's had like 5 surgeries in the last 18 months. And so my caretaking has been on this over the top. And one of the biggest just sort of traps that we can fall into is caretaker burnout.
Yeah.
And I did not know until I sat down and read your chapter on Mother Teresa how far I had kind of stepped into a burnout.
Mhm.
And when you started talking about trusting Jesus, not your feelings, or following Jesus, not your feelings, and and Mother Teresa's clear just vision of what she was supposed to do, and yet you get into the middle of it and you're like, really, God? I'm not this strong. This is terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not fun.
Yeah.
And you start doubting. And that, I think, is the reason that the whole chapter on Mother Teresa specifically was so touching in my own life, because by the end of the chapter, this is a woman who did such incredible work, and she was acknowledged for that incredible work. And as caregivers, sometimes we're not even seen or acknowledged, and the one that we're caring for gets a little snarky and mean. And we sit there and we go, what the heck am I doing this for? And yet, when you say follow Jesus, not your feelings, that is the thing that I talk about it in my book. It's the thing that I come back to over and over and over. And you just said something very, very important. And that is, we have to take the next step as if it's true.
Yeah.
Because it is true. Even if we don't feel like it's true, it's true.
Yeah.
And whether we're seen or not seen, it's true. And so thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I just appreciate that so much. So as we close out our conversation today, and I mean, I think you and I could just talk for hours about this
I think
because
so too.
like, oh my gosh. What is one thing you want to leave our listeners with that you want them to remember from our conversation today?
You're not alone in this. That is one of the lies that depression and pain whisper to us.
Mhm.
And so if you are there, if you're the person struggling with your mental health, if you're loving the person struggling with your mental health, you are not alone. You are not the first person to have walked this road. And so get the help that you need. Be encouraged. This is not the end of the story.
I love that. Thank you, Diana. How can the listeners get connected to you?
You can find me at my website, which is dianagruver.com. And then I'm also occasionally on Instagram at Diana Gruver and on Facebook at Diana Gruver Writer.
Okay, I'll put all of that in the show notes so that the listeners can get connected. And I'll even put a link to your book on Amazon so they can just click and purchase, because I love that simple click and purchase. And please do it, because oh my gosh, I promise you it will be fascinating. So Diana, thank you so much for joining us today. I learned so much, as you can tell from reading your book and just talking with you today. And I'm just so thankful that you're being so authentic and transparent with your story, because it is encouraging to so many people, and me especially.
Thank you so much, Carole. I'm really glad we got to talk today.
I know, me too. Oh my gosh. Thank you, listeners, so much for joining us. I hope that you appreciated this conversation as much as I did, and I appreciate each of you. If you know a caretaker, will you share the show with them? If you haven't subscribed or followed the show, would you do that? Because it's so critical for the algorithms inside all of how they get the podcast out there, and it helps other caretakers find us. I'm working on a new email newsletter that's going to start coming out in the coming months. I'm not sure exactly. I'm still working with a coach on getting that together. But I know that every week, pretty soon, you're going to get practical and inspirational information into your inbox every single week. I'm also going to have giveaways. I have got so many things that books, like I'll tell somebody I'm going to give away a book and they'll send me 3. And so I've got so many great things sitting in a box in the closet. I mean, it's like I need to start giving them away. So I'm going to have giveaways. I'm going to share books, other books that I haven't been able to feature on the website. On the podcast yet. And there's going to be events and other ways that we can build our caretaking community. Life as a caretaker can get messy and chaotic, and I want to encourage you to reach out if you feel overwhelmed, because as Diana just said, you're not alone. There are over 55 million caretakers in the US alone, and over 80 million and growing worldwide. Hear me say, you're not alone. Hear Diana and I say, you're not alone. I will be back next week for another meaningful conversation about what it looks like to be on a caretaker's journey. And until then, it's all about him.